The day I married Emma, people didn't congratulate me, they laughed. Some whispered that I've ruined my life. Others looked at me with pity, as if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. They said she wasn't beautiful enough, wasn't rich enough, and wasn't the kind of woman a successful man should marry. 5 years later, those same people stood in silence, staring at her with disbelief. Some even wished they could go back in time and take back every cruel word they had ever spoken. But by then, it was far too late. If you love emotional and true feeling stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 32 years old and I live in Seattle, Washington. I work as a software engineer for a growing technology company. My life has always been simple. I never cared much about expensive cars, designer clothes, or impressing strangers. I believed that character mattered more than appearance. Maybe that's because my parents raised me that way before they passed away when I was 23. Losing them changed me forever. It taught me that people can disappear in a single moment, but kindness stays in people's hearts long after they're gone. Emma Collins was 28 when I first met her. She worked at the city's public library. She loved books more than social media, preferred quiet afternoons over loud parties, and always smiled at people, even when life gave her reasons not to. She wasn't the kind of woman who would stop traffic when she walked into a room. She had a small scar across her left cheek from a childhood accident. It wasn't very noticeable, but in today's world, when everyone is obsessed with perfection, that tiny scar became the first thing people judged. The first time I saw Emma, she was sitting alone in a corner of the library reading a novel. A little boy accidentally knocked over a stack of books. Instead of getting annoyed, she laughed softly, helped him pick up everything, and even found the book he had been searching for. I checked out a book that day, even though I had no intention of reading it. I just wanted an excuse to talk to her. Over the next few weeks, I found myself visiting the library more than often. We talked about books, movies, childhood memories, and dreams. Unlike most conversations I had with other people, talking to Emma never felt forced. Hours passed like minutes. One rainy evening, as the library was closing, I offered to walk her to the bus stop. You don't have to, she said with her shy smile. I know, I replied. I want to. That short walk changed everything. She told me about her childhood, about the accident that left a scar on her face, and how children at school called her names for years. She admitted that she had stopped believing anyone would truly love her. I've learned not to expect much from people, she whispered. I looked at her and said something that surprised her. Maybe you're just surrounded by the wrong people. She didn't answer, she simply smiled. It was the kind of smile that carried years of hidden pain. 3 months later, we were officially dating. For me, falling in love with Emma was easy. For everyone else, accepting her was impossible. The first person to object was my older sister, Rachel. She invited me to dinner one Saturday afternoon, so she said while stirring her coffee, I've heard about your new girlfriend. I smiled. Her name is Emma, Rachel nodded. I saw her picture and she hesitated. I think you can do better. The room suddenly felt cold. What does that mean? I mean, Daniel, you're successful. You're handsome. You could date anyone. I already found someone, she signed. People would judge you. I leaned back in my chair. They're already judging her. Rachel looked away without saying another word. I thought that would be the end of it. A week later, my co-worker invited me to a lunch. Someone asked to see a picture of Emma. I proudly showed them. The table became unusually quiet. Then one man laughed. Seriously? Another shook his head. I thought you were joking. A woman across the table smiled awkwardly. Personality matters, I guess. I forced a smile, but inside something broke, not because they insulted me, but because they had reduced the kindest woman I had ever met to nothing more than an appearance. That evening, Emma noticed I was unusually quiet. What happened? She asked. Nothing. She smiled gently. Daniel, you're a terrible liar. I laughed. Then I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked out the apartment window for a long moment. Those 4 words hurt more than every insult I'd heard that day. No one should ever become used to being treated like that. I took her hand. They don't know who you are. She squeezed my fingers. Maybe they never will. 6 months later, I asked Emma to marry me. There was no fireworks, no expensive restaurants, no cameras, just the two of us sitting on a quiet beach at sunset. I don't have the perfect ring, I admitted. I don't need the perfect ring, she whispered. I don't have a perfect life. I don't want a perfect life. I smiled nervously. Will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes before she even answered yes. She hugged me so tightly that for that moment it felt like the entire world had disappeared. I thought the hardest part was over. I had no idea the real battle was just beginning. The news of our engagement spread through our family faster than I expected. At first I thought people would eventually come around. I believed that once they spent time with Emma, they would see what I saw. I wouldn't have been even more wrong. My mother wasn't alive to meet Emma. and there were days where I wished she was. She always taught me that the part of a person mattered more than anything. I often wondered what she would have said if she had been sitting beside me through everything that followed. Rachel offered to organise our engagement dinner. I took it as a sign that maybe she was trying to accept Emma. Instead, it became one of the most painful nights of our lives. The restaurant was beautiful, filled with warm lights and soft music. Emma wore a simple navy blue dress she had bought on sale because she didn't like spending money on herself. "You look beautiful," I whispered as she walked inside. She smiled nervously. "I hope your family likes me." I kissed her forehead. "They will." The moment we reached the table, I realised I had been lying to the both of us. Rachel barely looked at Emma. My uncle kept asking me about my career instead of speaking to my fiancé. One cousin stared at Emma's car for several uncomfortable seconds before finally saying, "So what exactly happened to your face?" The entire table was silent. Emma answered politely, "I was in a biking accident when I was 9. "Oh," he replied, "that's unfortunate." Then he changed the subject as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. I watched Emma quietly lower her eyes. Later that evening, while she stepped outside to answer a phone call, Rachel leaned towards me. "You still have time to change your mind." I stared at her. "What did you just say?" "I'm serious. Marriage is forever. So is treating people with respect," she signed. "I'm only trying to protect you." "No," I said calmly. "You're trying to protect your image." The conversation ended there, but the damage had already been done. On the drive home, Emma remained unusually quiet. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "For what?" "My family." She looked out the window. "They don't owe me kindness." "They do," she smiled sadly. I spent my whole life waiting for people to choose kindness. I stopped expecting it. That sentence stayed with me for days. A month before our wedding, something happened that neither of us expected. Emma resigned from her job at the library. I was shocked. "You love working there." "I did." "So why leave?" She hesitated. "The new manager thinks visitors feel more comfortable when someone more presentable is at the front desk." For several seconds I didn't even speak. "Did he actually say that?" She nodded. "He said it politely." I clenched my fist. "That's discrimination." She shrugged with a painful smile. "Sometimes discrimination wears a friendly face." That night I barely slept. I wanted to confront the manager. I wanted to report him. Emma stopped me. "Please don't." "But it's not fair." "I know, so why let him get away with it?" She took my hand. "Because I don't want my life to be controlled by people who don't deserve my energy." I had never met anyone stronger than Emma, not because she never cried, but because she refused to let bitterness define her. Our wedding day finally arrived. It was small, simple, exactly what we wanted, or at least that's what we thought. As guests arrived, I noticed people whispering. Some looked at Emma with curiosity, others with judgment. A few didn't even try to hide it. During the reception, one of my co-workers approached me holding a glass of champagne. He laughed quietly. "I still can't believe you actually went through with it." I looked him straight in the eyes. "Went through with what?" "This." Casually pointed towards Emma. "You could have married someone different." I felt anger rising inside me. Instead of arguing, I asked him one question. "What do you know about her?" He blinked. "What?" "What do you actually know about Emma?" He didn't answer because he knew nothing. Nothing about the little girl who survived years of bullying. Nothing about the woman who secretly volunteered every Saturday at the Children's Reading Centre. Nothing about the evening she spent reading stories to elderly patients at a local care home simply because they felt lonely. Nothing about the fact that she donated part of every paycheck to buy books for children whose families couldn't afford them. He had judged her worth after looking at her for less than 5 seconds. That wasn't intelligence, that was prejudice. Later that evening, after most guests had left, Emma and I stood alone in an empty reception hall. The music had stopped, the lights were dim. She slid off her shoes and laughed softly. "My feet are killing me." I laughed too. "Worth it?" She looked around the quiet room. "Absolutely." Then she became serious. "Daniel, yes." "What if they're right?" I frowned. "Who? Everyone." "What do you mean?" "What if one day you wake up and realize you deserve someone prettier, someone who you would admire?" I gently lifted her chin until she looked at me in the eyes. "Emma." She tried to smile, but tears were already forming. I held both of her hands. "The day I stop choosing you," I paused, "will be the day I stop being myself." She cried. Not because she doubted me, but because no one had ever loved her enough to erase the lies that the world had repeated for years. After we left the hall that night, neither of us realized that life was about to test our marriage in ways we had never imagined. Because only 3 months after our wedding, a simple phone call would change everything and begin the journey that would leave the same people who mocked Emma completely speechless. 5 years later, 3 months after our wedding, my phone rang at 6:17 and I called Monday morning. I almost ignored it. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello, is this Daniel Carter?" "Yes." "My name is Margaret. I'm calling from Evergreen Memorial Hospital." The moment I heard the words hospital, my heart dropped. "Is Emma okay?" There was a brief pause. Your wife is fine, Mr. Carter, but her grandma was admitted during the night. She kept asking for Emma. Within 20 minutes, we were driving through heavy rain towards the hospital. Emma barely spoke. Her grandmother, Evelyn, had raised her after she had an accident that left the scar on her face. She wasn't just family, she was the person who taught Emma how to survive when the rest of the world kept telling her she wasn't enough. When we entered the hospital room, Evelyn smiled weakly. There you are, my beautiful girl. Beautiful. I noticed something. Her grandma had never once looked at her scar. She only looked into Emma's eyes. Emma hugged her carefully. I'm here. For the next hour, I stayed near the window while they talked quietly. They laughed about old memories. They cried about difficult years. Then Evelyn asked me to step outside for a moment. I assumed she wanted privacy. 10 minutes later, Emma came out with tears streaming down her face. What's wrong? She couldn't answer. She simply hugged me. Later that evening, she finally spoke. My grandmother doesn't have much time. I held her hand all night. A week later, Evelyn passed away peacefully. The funeral was small, simple, just the way she wanted, and everyone left the cemetery. Emma remained standing beside the grave. I feel like I'm alone now, she whispered. I wrapped my arms around her shoulder. No. She looked at me. You still have me. She nodded. But grief has a strange way of making people feel empty even when they're surrounded by love. The following weeks became the hardest period of our marriage. Emma stopped laughing. She barely ate. She quit painting, something she had loved since childhood. Every evening she sat quietly on the balcony watching the sunset without saying a word. One night I found an old sketchbook hidden in our closet. Inside were dozens of breathtaking portraits, children, families, old couples holding hands. Every drawing was filled with emotion. I stared at them in disbelief. Emma, she looked embarrassed. They're not very good, I almost laughed. Not good, she shrugged. I've never shown them to anyone. Why? Because people would probably laugh. That sentence broke my heart. The world had criticized her for so many years that she no longer trusted her own talent. The next morning, while she was asleep, I carefully photographed several of her paintings. Without telling her, I uploaded them to a small online art community. I expected nothing, maybe a few encouraging comments. Instead, by evening, thousands of people had shared her artwork. Comments flooded in from strangers around the world. This is incredible. The emotion in these paintings is unbelievable. Who's the artist? I would buy this immediately. I stayed at the screen in complete shock. When Emma woke up, I handed her my phone. She looked confused. Then she started reading. Her hands began to shake. Then she whispered, They're talking about my paintings. They are. They actually like them. I smiled. They loved them. For the first time since her grandma died, she smiled. Not the polite smile she gave strangers. Not the smile she used to hide pain. A real smile. Over the next few months, something incredible began to happen. Small art collectors started contacting us. The local cafes asked to display her painting. Soon one gallery invited her to participate in a community exhibition. Emma almost says, No, I'm not good enough. I took both of her hands. You spent your whole life listening to people who underestimated you. She looked at me silently. It's time you listen to someone who believes in you, she agreed. The exhibition wasn't glamorous. It was held in a modest downtown gallery with white walls and soft jazz music. Emma stood nervously beside a painting while visitors walked past. For nearly an hour no one stopped. I could see doubt returning to her face. Then an elderly woman paused in front of one portrait. She stood there for several minutes without speaking. Finally she turned towards Emma. Did you paint this? Emma nodded yes. The woman wiped away her tear. This reminds me of my late husband. She bought the painting immediately. Then another visitor bought a second one. By the end of the evening, every single painting had been sold. Emma couldn't believe it, neither could I. As we drove home that night, she kept looking out the window. I don't understand. What I now? I smiled because talent doesn't disappear, it just waits for the right person to notice. She leaned her head against my shoulders. For the first time in years, she wasn't seeing herself through the eyes of those who rejected her. She was finally beginning to understand and see the way I always had. But neither of us knew that someone had also noticed her success, someone from her past, someone who had once laughed at our marriage, and that person was about to return with a secret that was threatened everything we built together. A few weeks after Emma's first successful exhibition, life finally felt peaceful. For the first time since we met, I saw her waking up with excitement instead of anxiety. She spent hours in the small studio we built in our garage, surrounded by paintbrushes, unfinished canvases, and classical music playing softly in the background. Every painting she created seemed to carry a small piece of her soul. I often stood quiet at the doorway watching her work. She never noticed me, and I loved that because those were the moments where she was completely herself. One Friday afternoon, my assistant walked into my office holding a white envelope. This was delivered by hand, she said. There was no return address. I opened it. Inside was an invitation to the Pacific Northwest Art Gala, one of the most prestige art events in Seattle. Emma has been invited as a feature emerging artist. I couldn't believe it. When I showed her the invitation that evening, she laughed. This has to be a mistake. It isn't. There are hundreds of artists, and you're one of them. She stared at the invitation for a long time before quietly saying, I'm scared. I smiled. So am I. She looked surprised. Really? Every time you take a step towards your dream, I'm afraid someone will try to convince you that you don't deserve it. She hugged me. Thank you for never believing them. The night of the gala arrived, Emma wore a simple emerald green dress. She insisted on styling her own hair. She covered her scar with nothing. For the first time since I've known her, she didn't even try. You forgot your makeup, I teased gently. She smiled. No, I finally stopped hiding. I looked at her for several seconds. She had never seemed more beautiful. When we entered the ballroom, photographers surrounded famous artists, collectors, and business leaders. No one recognized Emma, at least not yet. As guests walked through the exhibition, I noticed people slowing down in front of her paintings, one after another, whispering spreading across the room. Who painted this? The emotion is unbelievable. I've never seen work like this. Then something unexpected happened. A well-known gallery owner walked towards Emma. My name is Olivia Bennett. Emma smiled politely. It's nice to meet you. Emma extended her hand. I'd like to represent you. Emma froze. I'm sorry, what? I believe your work belongs in galleries across the country. For several seconds, Emma couldn't even speak. I squeezed her hand. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. This was the moment she spent her entire life believing would never come. By the evening, across the ballroom, I recognized a familiar face. Rachel, my sister. She hadn't spoken to us in nearly a year. Now she was standing only a few feet away, staring at Emma's painting. She simply walked towards us. For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, she whispered. Emma smiled politely. Hello, Rachel. Rachel looked down at the floor. I owe you an apology. Emma remained silent. I judged you before I ever knew you. Tears filled Rachel's eyes. I thought I was protecting my brother. She looked directly at Emma. But the truth is I was protecting my own pride. Emma gently nodded. I appreciate you saying that. Rachel's voice trembled. I didn't expect forgiveness. Emma answered with the same kindness that had always amazed me. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It gives us a chance to rebuild something better. Rachel broke down crying. She hugged Emma. Watching them, I realized something. Kindness has accomplished what anger never could. But fate still has one more surprise waiting for us. Later that evening, the host stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to announce the winner of this year's People's Choice Award. Emma squeezed my hand so tightly it almost hurt. She whispered, I'm not going to win. I smiled. You already have. The presenter opened the envelope. The winner is... A long pause filled the room. Emma Collins Carter. The ballroom erupted into applause. Emma stood frozen. She looked around as if they had called the wrong name. I leaned closer and whispered, they're talking about you. She slowly walked towards the stage. As she accepted the award, every person in the audience stood to applause, including people who ignored her only hours earlier. The camera flashed non-stop. The same woman who had once been rejected because of a small scar was now the most celebrated artist in the room. When Emma began her acceptance speech, the entire ballroom became silent. She smiled through tears. When I was a little girl, I believed being different meant I would never belong. She paused. For many years, I believed that voices that told me I wasn't enough. Then she looked directly at me. But one person looked at me and saw everything the world refused to see. The audience turned towards me. I wouldn't be standing here tonight without my husband. My eyes filled with tears. She continued, this award doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every person who has ever been rejected because they look different, and every person who chose kindness instead of judgment. The applause lasted nearly a minute. As we walked out the ballroom that night, reporters rushed towards Emma. The same society that had once ignored her now wanted interviews, photographs and headlines. 5 years earlier, people couldn't believe I had married Emma. Now they couldn't believe that they had ever underestimated her. And that's why I finally understood something my parents had taught me long ago. Beauty fades, money comes and goes, popularity changes overnight, but character has the power to change lives forever. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories.